Okay, Shalom Aleichem, everybody. We are going to continue with our Sefer HaChinuch in our mitzvot. We did the introduction. We spoke about the writer who was anonymous. We spoke about the reasons behind the beauty of this mitzvah, the beauty of this book, the importance of this book. We fast forwarded into the first mitzvah in the Torah, not the first mitzvah that the Jewish people were commanded. We spoke about the differences between that. We spoke about mitzvah priya v'revia. Who was it commanded to? Who's obligated to do the mitzvah? What is the consequence from a biblical perspective for one who chooses not to do the mitzvah? And how many children does one have to fulfill the mitzvah peru urvu? So we spoke about all these different things. We're going to move on to the next mitzvah now. We're up to mitzvah number 2. And again, this is mitzvah number 2 found in the order of the Torah versus mitzvah number 2 that the Jewish people were commanded. Mitzvah number 2 is mitzvah Milah, the mitzvah of circumcision. So just as an introduction, mitzvah Milah is a positive mitzvah. It's a mitzvah aseh, and we're going to see as the Torah tells us, go and circumcise, and we'll learn the beauty, a few of the beautiful reasons behind this mitzvah. So let's begin. So first of all, let's move this up a little bit. Mitzvah Milah. Parashat Lech Lecha yesh ba mitzvat aseh achat. It has on the parasha of Lech Lecha, Bereshit Noach Lech Lecha. We're up to the third parasha in the Torah, and it has only one mitzvah in this parasha. Vehi mitzvat milah shene'emar, as it says in the Torah, vezot beriti asher tishmeru. This is the covenant you shall keep. Beni uvenechem, between you and I, says God, uben zaracha acharecha, and for your offsprings, your descendants, your children to follow. Himol lachem kol zachar. What is the covenant that I want you to keep? Himol lachem kol zachar. Every male should be circumcised. So there are a few points that we need to talk about here. The first thing we need to talk about is Zod beriti asher tishmeru. This is the covenant you should keep, which comes to say that there are other covenants as well that one either should keep or could keep, or are potential out there to keep between us and Hashem. And so when we talk about the word covenant, it's different than promise or swear or deal. Covenant is an action that we perform that shows our relationship and our dedication to our relationship, in this case, dedication to Hashem and to the religion, that we're kind of creating, to a certain sense, a cult. Okay, almost, we hear the word cult, we think of it in a derogatory way, we think of it in a negative way, because cult in many different contexts is shared about people who are the KKK and other groups that might do things that, I don't know, sacrifice to Satan and all this different stuff that's out there. So we're not referring to cult in that sense of the meaning at all, but rather we're referring it to it in a way where we have something unique that we share with this power, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with our religion, that now we are identifiable by this, that we belong to this group of people, religion, or sense of observance. Okay, so Zot beriti asher tishmeru. This is the covenant that you should keep. Comes to say that there are other covenants out there that could be kept, but this is the one that I want you to keep. Beni uvenechem, that is between you and I. It's unique. Uben zaracha achrecha, of course, meaning to say not just to the people who were commanded this, but rather moving forward as well. Himo lachem kol zachar. I want you to circumcise every male. And again, just very interestingly, we see how when we talk about there not being any details in the Torah, so we don't see details of who is the sandak, what is the sandak, who is the mohel, what is the mohel, all these different things. Again, those are just small pieces of the mitzvah of milah. So here's where emunat chachamim and the lessons that we're learning from the Rabbanan, from our sages, are super vital and equally as important as what the Torah tells us, because if we don't have what the chachamim say, then technically speaking, this means absolutely nothing to us. We can't really understand it. Okay? V'nichpela b'seder isha ki tazriya. In Sefer Vayikra, in the book of Vayikra, this was actually brought again, this mitzvah, and now you'll see it's a little bit different. Kedichtiv, as it says in the Torah, uvayom hashemini, and on the 8th day yimod b'sar orlato. you shall circumcise the foreskin or his foreskin, of course, referring to a male. So there's a couple of things that we need to talk about here again. This is very important. First of all, when we look at the first pasuk, Shene'emar zot beriti asher tishmeru beni uvenechem. This is the covenant you shall keep between you and I, uben zaracha acharecha, and for your offsprings. Himol lachem kol zachar. I want you to circumcise all of your males. Which day of the week? Where? Right? These are the things that we don't know. And here you see in the next pasuk, Ubayom hashemini yimod b'sar olachem, it's almost like it's a continuation of the first pasuk. And on the 8th day, you shall circumcise your foreskin. Now, the word orla, it's very important to note that the word orla is foreskin, which means extra skin that we were given. There are more parts in the body that have foreskins. For example, the heart. The heart has a foreskin, and the earlobe, according to Chachamim, the earlobe, the part where we're going to put earrings for those women out there that put earring, that would be your foreskin as well. So when the Torah says Ubayom hashemini, and on the 8th day, Yimol b'sar orlato, you shall circumcise his foreskin, the orla, who's to say that it's referring to the male organ? Maybe it's referring to the heart, maybe it's referring to the ear. Right? Again, you see the importance of how the Torah is taught through Divrei Chachamim. We can't take this lightly and say, oh, they were human, they were people. Why do I have to listen to them? Who's to say that what they're saying is true? There's no way to understand this otherwise, because from the pasuk itself, yes, it says that you should circumcise the male, and from there you could say, if there's 3 foreskins on the body for the male, 2 foreskins for the body on the woman, on the female, and the Torah is telling us that they want us to circumcise the males, and I guess you could learn from there. Yeah, you could make such a lesson, and there is such a lesson that is made, but ultimately, is it definitive? Because of the fact that it says kol zachar and orla, and because the male has one more orla than the female, therefore automatically that's what it means. I'm not so comfortable to say that just looking at these pesukim, that's how I would learn it. So again, we're learning lesson within lesson today, that not only do we learn about the mitzvah of Milah, but we're also learning further the importance, how important it is to have emunat chachamim, to have trust and belief in our sages that what they taught us is divine information from Hashem. So we have 2 pesukim. Getting back to our point, we have 2 pesukim in the Torah that are the references for the mitzvah of Milah. One is found in Parashat Lech Lecha in the book of Bereshit, and the other is found in Parashat Tazria, which is found in Sefer Vayikra. Okay, awesome. Let's keep going. Mishor Sheh HaMitzvah. What's the root? And this is super interesting. I mean, all of this is interesting in my opinion, but this is super interesting. לפי שרצה השם יתברך לקבוע בעם אשר הבדיל להיות נקרא על שמו, אות קבוע בגופם, להבדילם משאר העמים בצורת גופם, כמו שהם מובדלים מהם בצורת נפשותם, אשר מוצאם ובעם איננו שווה. So what's the root of this mitzvah? משורשי המצווה, I'm going back again. לפי שרצה השם יתברך לקבוע בעם אשר הבדיל להיות נקרא על שמו. Because Hashem wanted to set something in the nation that shows as a separation between the nation, okay, Am Yisrael, and the rest of the nations, that we are named after Hashem. So the first thing we have to focus on here, and this is a very big lesson in general when it comes to assimilation, that one of the reasons why there is a mark on our body, which means there is something that is physically done that shows us to be different from other nations, is as a reminder for us, and it's a reminder for the rest of the world, the rest of the nations, that we have a certain element of difference, not better or worse, but difference than the other nations. And we have to maintain that. So we're doing something that is cult related, quote unquote, covenant, right? That's what we explained about covenant being a direct relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is unique. Here we're doing something to show how unique our relationship is with Hashem. It's to show us and it's to show others. So when we walk around every day of our life as Jews, maybe some of us don't wear a kippah, maybe some of us don't wear tzitzit, maybe some of us as women might not dress halachically modest, maybe we might do things that when you put person versus person next to the other, they're seemingly exactly the same. There's a very, very big difference that we see, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to set something in us to make sure that we can identify the difference that we have between us and the nations, that we are named after Hashem. V'hitem li am segula. You shall be for me a chosen nation, a special nation, a nation that God chooses to put on the pedestal because of the fact that we chose to be chosen by Hashem, which gave us 613, as we said, slash 1,000 responsibilities and obligations, commandments and mitzvot, and therefore now there's something that comes along with that. So, לפי שרצה השם יתברך לקבוע בעם אשר הבדיל להיות נקרא על שמו, because we see that Hashem wanted to set something unique in us. Ot kavua begufam. This is a sign that was set in our bodies. We take it with us everywhere that we go. And of course, when it comes to procreation and it comes to inhabiting the world from a religious perspective, from a Jewish perspective, then it clearly makes sense that this is our continuation. And therefore, this is the foreskin that makes the most sense to set this sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. To separate us, to differentiate us from the rest of the nations, betzurat gufam, in the way that our body is set. So same way that we are set differently, we are differentiating ourselves from the other nations from a spiritual perspective, so too we do the same from a physical perspective, because there's a balance, right? There's a relationship between our soul and our body, right? I always say it's like you take a basketball and you cut it in half. You have a half, bottom half and a top half, and now you put them together, you have one basketball. You separate them, you have two halves of one basketball. So we have the soul and we have the body. You put them together, you have one person. So the person is made up of the soul and is made up of the body. And here we make a differentiation in our soul because of the 613 commandments that we have and the mitzvot that we keep, that we were commanded to keep. And so too now we're going to have something that's also going to be a differentiation between us and the nations when it comes to our body as well. Okay, so keep that in mind. Why do I say that? Because if you were to take two people, okay, you take a guy by the name of Moshe and you take a guy by the name of Musa or Muhammad, whichever one you want, and you put one next to the other and you look at them and you say, this guy has a beard, this guy has a beard, this guy has short hair, this guy has short hair, this guy has long hair, this guy has long hair, this guy has arms, this guy has arms, this guy has legs, this guy has legs. What is the difference between them? How could I say this is a Jew and this is a non-Jew? So from their actions, based on their soul, right, from a soul perspective, their actions will tell me. If Moshe wakes up in the morning and he prays in a minyan and he puts on tefillin and he says berachot and he does the mitzvot that he's supposed to do, then you see clearly from a soul perspective, this man is different. If you see that this person now on his body, he doesn't cut his arm off or he doesn't add another set of ears if he's Jewish or he's not Jewish, but yet he has a brit milah, I could see now that this is someone who identifies himself differently, who differentiates himself from the others because the world behaves in one way and he behaves in a separate way, this Moshe. So we have a spiritual and we have a physical change that we're different from, which again protects us, but also makes a sign out there. והעם נבחר חפץ השם יתברך להשלים תכונתו. And the nation was chosen by Hashem, interestingly, to complete our being. There's another very interesting reason, which I'm going to focus on in a second. ורצה להיות ההשלמה על ידי האדם ולא בוראו שלם מבטן. And God wanted us to perfect ourselves, to complete ourselves, that we as human beings should do the action, perform the action of completing and perfecting ourselves, and not to be perfect out of the womb. לרמז אליו כי כאשר תשלום בצורת גופו על ידו, כן בידו להשלים צורת נפשו בהכשר פעולותיו. Very, very interesting. I love this. Again, I really love to teach this mitzvah and all the other mitzvot, but this has some type of a unique lesson behind it that is a core and the fundamental in Judaism. So what's another reason that we perform the mitzvah of Brit Milah, right? We said the first reason is because we want to make sure that we differentiate ourselves from the other nations, and it's a sign in our body that we carry with us. Here, the second reason is because Hashem chose that we, the chosen people, again, I want to elaborate on this one more time and maybe many more times moving forward. Chosen people doesn't mean that Hashem came and said, you, all you with the long noses, I want you guys to be my nation. Hashem says, who wants to be my nation? And then all the Jews stepped forward. It happens to be coincidence. We all had long noses, and we were the ones who stepped forward. So we chose to be chosen. So when we're not ridiculed, but when we're attacked or people come and say, oh, the chosen people, you guys think you're the chosen. Well, we chose to be chosen. You have a magician who's standing on the stage and he says, I need a contestant. I need someone to come help me up here. And one guy raises his hand and says, okay, you, sir, come here. Why are you yelling and screaming at the guy who he asked? This guy raised his hand. He was chosen, but he chose to be chosen. He just didn't sit there dormant, and he was the one who was chosen by the magician. That being said, because we are the chosen people, so now we understand that the chosen people means that we chose to be chosen. Hashem wanted us to complete ourselves, which means that we have chosen to be chosen. We are now we're separating ourselves from the entire world. We're bringing ourselves now to a new place, to a whole new identity as humans, because you have the human being, and then you have the human being that was chosen to be chosen by God to be the Am Segula. Well, Hashem says, I want you to put an effort as well. Yeah, I could create you to be perfect, no problem at all. That's easy. But I want you to perfect yourself. And how are you going to perfect yourself? Interestingly, by removing what's called an imperfection, orla, foreskin, something extra. Comes HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, you are perfect, yes, but the way you're going to be perfect is through this action of Brit Milah. Okay, so we should be proactive and not to create this quote unquote perfect from the womb, coming to say that the other nations are created perfect the way they are, right? They don't need to remove this foreskin to be perfect. It's I guess the best way to look at it is as follows: you buy a new bottle of ketchup, okay, and it's a fresh bottle of ketchup, hasn't been used yet, so it's a perfect bottle of ketchup, right? There's all whatever ounces it says on the bottle, everything's found inside of there. It's clean, it's all there, it's proper, everything's great. Now you pop open the cap and you try to squirt the ketchup out, it's not going to come out. Why? Because you need to take off the cap and remove that little seal that's on top that prevents contamination and other things that could happen. You have to remove that seal first, and then you put the cap back on, and now you could use the ketchup. It's the same idea. The idea here is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us in a way where we're perfect. Yeah, the body is perfect, but that foreskin is the action that needs to be taken in order to perfect the physical element of our relationship with Hashem, that covenant. In order to be able to create that covenant, it's not verbal, it has to, or not only verbal, it has to be physical as well, and that's what Brit Milah is. Okay? Leramez elav, the next piece that we learn from here is Leramez elav, ki ka'asher tashlum tzurat the same way that we have to physically perfect our bodies, ourselves, so too we have to perfect ourselves from a spiritual perspective. So it's not just enough to do something physically and we're born perfect, 9 months of incubation come out, and now we're born perfect, and then we have to go and do this Brit Milah, which finalizes the perfection on our hand, and we're done, we're the perfect Jew. But you also have to perfect yourself spiritually as well. And of course, that's going to be a lifelong lesson. That's something that requires years and years and years and years, because every year that we grow, there's a new lesson that could be learned. There's a new level that could be achieved. And there's a new bracket or chapter in life that we are, or a milestone that we are reaching, that now requires a whole new set of elements of work. Okay, so that's the second and third reason as to why we have the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Next, ve'ha'over al mitzvah zo, and someone who transgresses, which means they choose not to circumcise, ve'lo mal atzmo, mishegia lechlal onshin, and chooses not to circumcise himself once he reaches the level, the age that he can be punished, which is 13 years old and 1 day. We need to finish that 1 day that completes the 13 years. Every day that goes by past the 13th year and 1 day of a male, Jewish male who was born, that does not perform Brit Milah, there is mevatel mitzvat aseh, which means that they are avoiding or canceling a potential mitzvat aseh. So every day there is an element of punishment for that, because they're mevatel a mitzvat aseh. Okay, so coming to say, there's a couple of lessons that we're going to learn out of just this line again. So later on, so I'm going to read it again so we can be clear. One who transgresses and chooses not to perform the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Velo mal atzmo, keyword atzmo, and does not circumcise himself, which if I'm going to ask you who is obligated to perform the mitzvah of Brit Milah, then I think your answer is there. A lot of people think that the obligation of the mitzvah Milah is the mohel, right? The rabbi or the individual who performs the circumcision. That's clearly inaccurate information based on what I just read. Once they reach the age of being potentially punished for their actions, and that's 13 years and 1 day, then now every single day there's a mitzvah, there's a bitul mitzvah. All right, awesome. Let's keep on going. Ve'en bekol haTorah mitzvat aseh shechayavin al betula karet ki im zo ve'shchitat haPesach. Very, very, very important. There is no other mitzvat aseh in the Torah, right? There's a do mitzvah, go and do, put on tefillin, go and do, give tzedakah, go and do brit milah, go and do, slaughter the korban pesach, which is coming up in the next few mitzvot. Ve'en bechol haTorah mitzvat aseh shehayavim al betula karet. That means that for all the mitzvot aseh that we have, go and do, go and do, go and do, if a person chooses not to go and do, so there's no karet involved. Karet is usually found. Karet is a punishment, one of the 4 punishments that the religious, the biblical judicial system could punish over. And there are different interpretations as to what karet means. I am not going to go into it now. No, I'm not. We'll leave that for a little bit later when we get to Shchitat HaPesach, because it's a lot more relevant there. However, what I want you to keep note on is that there's a punishment that could be enforced by the Bet Din, which is called karet. And for all the mitzvot, the do mitzvot that we have, go and do this mitzvah. If a person chooses not to do them, there are only 2 mitzvot out of all the 613 that if one chooses not to do these do mitzvot, they could get karet. And that is Brit Milah, and that is Shahitat Korban HaPesach, the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach. Okay, so coming to say that if a person eats on Yom Kippur, there is a punishment of karet. V'nichreta hanefesh hahi me'ammeha. The Torah tells us that a person who eats on Yom Kippur, again, assuming that it's not halachically permitted for this person to eat, because there are medical reasons why a person would be permitted to eat or must eat on Yom Kippur, but a person who eats on Yom Kippur that is deemed and halachically commanded not to eat, they're punished with karet. That's a don't do, and they did. Now there's a punishment. Here, there's a go do, and they just refrained from doing, which means that they didn't proactively go against something. They just sat in their seat and didn't do. They sat on their couch and folded their arms and sat like this at the age of 13 days and 1 day, for 13 years and 1 day, and just didn't do this mitzvah, or they didn't slaughter the Korban Pesach on Ben HaArbaim, on Erev Pesach, in the time of the Bet HaMikdash, and they would get karet. It shows you the importance and the level of severity when we talk about this mitzvah and identifying with our religion. And there is a similarity between Korban Pesach and Brit Milah, which I have to share with you now because it's so exciting to share. And that is that the common denominator between Milah and Korban Pesach is that Milah is an element of identification, physical identification of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that unique covenant that we're making with God. And Korban Pesach is Jewish people were slaves, and now that they are now taken out of slavery for Paro, they become a nation, which is whose nation? V'hitem li am segula, Hashem's nation. So now we automatically go and we perform this mitzvah of Korban Pesach. So again, they both have the common denominator of showing a certain element of relationship. I don't want to use the word covenant here because there's no covenant with Shchitat Pesach, but there's an element of relationship between us and God. And for that identification, you can't mess with that. That's the core of our religion. The core of the religion is to show our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why we do certain things like wearing a kippah. When we walk around the streets and we're wearing a kippah, we're showing that we have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Unfortunately, there are people that are embarrassed or for other reasons maybe didn't grow up with wearing a kippah, and that hopefully one day they could educate themselves to the importance of it, because it's not only is it an identification, ID tag, but it's also a tool that helps us refrain from doing things that a Jew should not do, right? Just think about that a little bit. You can see how I'm alluding to that. So the point that I'm trying to make is that identification with our relationship is super important. It prevents assimilation and many other issues that the religion has or could have potentially. And that's why you see that in both of the mitzvot, there is a common denominator. Okay, awesome. So let's go to part 2 of our mitzvah number 2, and that is the English. That is English. That's a few of the questions that we have. First question is, who's obligated to fulfill this mitzvah? Okay, and again, we spoke about this. There are a few players in the mitzvah of Milah. There are a few players in the mitzvah of Milah. There's the baby, all right, that's the key element. There is the mohel, which is the individual who is trained, the rabbi who is trained to perform the circumcision according to the halakha. Now, the average individual who doesn't practice Milah regularly, being that we don't have children every Monday and Thursday, right? That one person doesn't have children every Monday and Thursday. So it's not common for a father to perform the mitzvah of Milah. But there are a lot of halachot that one has to know when it comes to performing this mitzvah. So what do? You go to the professional. Okay, so let me give you a classic example. A guy goes to the bathroom and the toilet is stuffed. And they have to unstuff the toilet. So they go to their garage and they pull out the plunger and they put it into the toilet and they start plunging the toilet. Now, for the average clogging, a person put one too many pieces of toilet paper, not the end of the world. A plunger will probably work, and Shalom al Yisrael, they just became Mr. Roto-Rooter. But what happens when it's more detailed, when it's something that really is deep in the roots, down the piping, and so on and so forth? Now, the whole house is backed up. What are you going to do now? You're not going to use a plunger. That doesn't work. You need to call the professionals. You got to call the Roto-Rooter guys, because these guys are trained to do something that you could technically do, but they're trained to do it. It's something that they do all day, every day, and therefore they can hear the problem. They could smell the problem. You could smell the problem too, but they could hear the problem. They could sense how to fix it immediately without any hesitation. So it comes to the certain mitzvot that we have, like writing tefillin, a sofer. What is a sofer? A sofer stam. A sofer means a scribe. Stam are Rashi Tevot for Sefer Torah, Tefillin and Mezuzah. The three things that we write on the parchment is a Sefer Torah, of course, Tefillin and Mezuzah. Now, everybody could write a Mezuzah. Everybody could write a Tefillin. Everybody could write a Sefer Torah. Everyone, every Jew could technically write a Sefer Torah. Whether certain people at certain ages and genders should or should not, according to the halakha, is not my conversation. But everybody could write a Sefer Torah, and every male over the age of 13 could write his own Tefillin. However, being that we don't write tefillin every single day, you buy your tefillin once at the age of 13, and then maybe 20, 30 years later, you might buy another pair because it did its time. So because it's not so common, so then go to the professionals, go to the Roto-Rooter guy, go to the guy who knows how to do this, who does this every single day for the Jews out there, for the thousands of Jews that are buying tefillin every single day. Go to the professionals. So the mitzvah of Milah is no different. Who is obligated to fulfill this mitzvah? There is the baby, right? The boy, the male. There is the mohel, who is the certified individual who does this all day, or the fellow who does this more commonly than we do, who's trained to know the halachot and trained to know how to perform this mitzvah. And then you have someone who's called the sandak, and all this is going to come up on the slide in just a minute. The sandak is the individual who holds the baby. So the baby can't just be put on a table, strapped down with duct tape. And there's no holding the baby app these days. So you have to have someone to hold the baby. And we'll talk about why that's so important moving forward, the connection with Eliyahu Hanavi. So you have the baby, mohel, and sandak. Those are the three main players of the Brit Milah. Notice I didn't mention mother, I didn't mention father, I didn't mention guests, I didn't mention bagels with cream cheese, I didn't mention all these fancy foods that are served, borekasim and fresh omelets with a guy who makes it for you fresh, because that's not part of the mitzvah of Milah. Who's obligated for this mitzvah? The person themselves, the child. Why is it so important to make mention of this? Because what happens if a mother and or father do not circumcise the child? So you have a child who is now 12, almost turning 13, and he's told, listen, you were never circumcised. For whatever the reasons may be, parents died early, or maybe the parents were secular and they didn't believe in this. They thought that it was, they were anti-Milah because it's let the child make their choice. We've heard a lot of different rationales, and again, each their own, but they should really understand the depths and the beauties of mitzvot. So now, if a person, a child who was past 8 days old wasn't circumcised, do they have to circumcise themselves? The answer is yes, because the obligation of this mitzvah of Milah is upon the person themselves. Okay, awesome. Until what age is the obligation active? Until the day they pass. All right, they pass means they die. So a person is obligated to circumcise themselves. A male is obligated to circumcise themselves until the day they die. Why is this important, and where do we see this even nowadays? A lot of people might be asking now, why would this be relevant? Well, guess what? Did you know? I happen to have someone who, unfortunately, may Hashem bless his soul, has passed away. Years ago, there was a friend of mine in Hatzalah who, his name was Beinish Mandel, really, really a big tzaddik. He was a paramedic and he studied Milah, and he used to fly to Russia. This is 20 years ago. He used to fly to Russia once a year. And all the people who were identifying, because there was a movement, and this movement is still moving, but back then people were identifying with their origins to learning that they were Jewish, right? Because think about it, we're talking about Holocaust, and a lot of children were sent to Christian homes to survive so that they could survive and they could live through the war. And then eventually, years later, their mother, who they thought was their mother, or their father, who they thought was their father, on their deathbed says, listen, I'm not your mother, I'm not your father. Your mother was a Jewish woman. This was her name. This is her last letter that she wrote to you. This is the documentation that she shared. This is who you really are. This is your birth certificate. She gave you to me so that you could live till today, because she perished in the Holocaust. She was murdered in the Holocaust. So I'm not really your mother. And before I died, I was told to tell this to you. And she raised them, and the whole 9 yards, everything. Now this person who might be in his 40s, might be in his 50s, younger or older, is now sitting here and saying, wait a second, so I'm not Christian, I'm a Jew, so I want to connect with my roots. And they were never circumcised because there were some babies that were given right out of delivery, right? There were some children who, within the first 8 days of being born, they were given over to a Christian child, with Christian family, which actually was better off for them, because it was kind of like, this baby was just born to the Christian mother, as opposed to suddenly you have this 3-year-old who the neighbors never knew of, now they know of, right? This child was born and raised as a Christian. And why would the Christian mother or father circumcise this child? There's no reason for it. So now, before the deathbed, they learn that they're Jewish. Now they want to go and circumcise themselves. Well, it's not so simple, and therefore there are people, holy people like Rav Beinish Mandel and others, some doctors that I know of, who used to fly out to Russia, and they would perform Brit Milah, circumcisions, on these elderly gentlemen that now were ready to become connected with their roots, to become Jewish. They were Jewish, but to perform this mitzvah. Okay, it was done under sedation, of course. So just to keep it clear, it wasn't, it's not the same way that we do it when you have a child. But at the same time, that's why it's important to note until what age is one obligated to perform this mitzvah. It's till the day they die, because there are people who were born and raised that didn't have this mitzvah, and they need to perform this mitzvah. All right, so very important thing. There's a lot of talk in the halakha. If there was a child who was born and within the first 30 days of being born, or after 30 days of being born, they weren't healthy enough to have a Brit Milah, and then they passed, do we perform a Brit Milah for them, even though they're unfortunately dead? But do we perform a Brit Milah for them? So there are opinions that say absolutely, they have to be buried as a Jew once they're 8 days or older, and they weren't healthy enough to have a Brit Milah, but they passed away, then they need a Brit Milah. So there's conversation, is it 30 days and so on and so forth. But again, just to show you the importance of this mitzvah. All right, let's continue. What is a mohel? He is the messenger to fulfill the mitzvah. Shaliach Adam Kemoto. Very important halakha. Shaliach Adam Kemoto means that there is a terminology in the Torah that you can send someone to do for you your obligation. Okay, and again, it's not exactly as simple as I'm saying it, but look at it as UPS. Right, you have a package coming from Amazon. So Amazon gives the package to UPS. UPS brings it to you. When the UPS guy knocks on your door and he delivers the box to you, right? You don't say, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much for giving this to me. I'm so thankful that you gave this to me. Thank you. It was great to talk to you on the other." No, I don't know you. You're my UPS guy. You're a great guy. Thank you so much. And around December, we give them a box of cookies. But at the end of the day, I don't know you. You didn't send it to me. You're just a messenger from the sender, right? It was sent from Amazon. So you call Mr. Amazon, you say, hey, Jeff, thank you so much for sending it over to me. So who is the mohel, or what is the mohel? It's the messenger to fulfill the mitzvah. Because if the child who is 8 days old who's obligated, right? They're obligated from 8 days old, they're obligated to perform this mitzvah, but of course they can't. So we appoint a messenger. Shaliach Adam Kemoto, the messenger of man is like man himself. Please remember this and write this down. The messenger of man is like man himself. We're going to be talking about this a lot moving forward, and you'll be hearing this a lot as you guys are developing and growing. So the messenger of man is like man himself, and they can perform the mitzvah for you. All right? Awesome. What is the sandak? The sandak, it sounds like some type of Persian bread. No, it's not. It is the one who holds the baby during the milah. So while the milah is being performed, it's a very big kavod to give this mitzvah of sandakut to an individual. And that's why if you've ever been by Brit Milah, after the milah is performed, right away you see that once they finish the milah and the baby is taken away, then everybody lines up to the sandak and he gives everybody a personal blessing and so on. Why? Because there's a lot of holiness and power to the sandak and to the mohel. Sandak is the fellow who's holding the baby. So we got the mohel who's going to perform the mitzvah. We have the sandak who holds the baby during the mitzvah. Okay, does one perform the okay? So before I get to this, I just want to focus on one little point here. I realize that I'm moving forward too fast. What is, when we talk about the sandak and we talk about the mohel, what is the relationship with Eliyahu Hanavi? Why do I say this Eliyahu Hanavi? Because there is a kiseh shel Eliyahu, the chair of Eliyahu Hanavi, and by every Brit Milah, the baby is taken from the arms of the carrier. Remember, there's only 3 people who are actually the most important and obligatory to this mitzvah: the baby, the mohel, the sandak, even though it could be done without a sandak, and technically without a mohel if the child is older, obviously. But ultimately, these are the 3 big players in the mitzvah. And the baby is taken, so the procession is as follows. The baby comes out of the room, someone is carrying the baby, usually on a fancy pillow, brings it down, hands it, and puts it on a chair, and it's called Kiseh Shel Eliyahu. And then this baby is taken from the Kiseh Shel Eliyahu and brought onto the lap of the sandak, and oftentimes the sandak will sit on the Kiseh Shel Eliyahu, so they have a designated chair, whatever the custom may or may not be. Where does Eliyahu come into this? That's the point of what I'm trying to say. Eliyahu is known as Ze Kiseh Shel Eliyahu HaNavi Malach HaBerit. He is known as the angel of Brit Milah. Why? There are not 10 peoples. There are 10 people who went up to the heavens in their bodily form, as the Gemara tells us. One of those 10 people was Batya, the daughter of Paro, the one who brought Moshe Rabbeinu from the river and saved his life ultimately and brought him into the palace, and on her hands and based on her, who convinced her father to allow him into the house. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu became the leader of the Jewish people. So that's one of the people. The other one of these people, of these 10 people, is Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu went to Hara Carmel, and from Hara Carmel, the mountain of Carmel, he went up to the Shamayim in his bodily form. And the reason why Eliyahu Hanavi went up to the heavens in his bodily form, amongst the many other pious and righteous reasons that were of his nature, was because in his times, prior to his times, there was a major plague of assimilation. And the Jewish people were convinced to stop circumcising their boys. There was no more mitzvah of circumcision. People were not performing the mitzvah of Milah. I don't know if we could even grasp what that means. Once in 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe once in 10 years, I would hear as a rabbi of someone who didn't circumcise their child, and we have to get on that phone and say, hey, listen, I understand, I know, I get it, listen, please let us, we figure it out. Or we hear of someone maybe a little bit more than once in 5 years that says, I'd rather the doctor perform it in the hospital than a rabbi with a long beard, right? And then we go in, not so common, but that happens. What we don't hear is villages and towns and cities of Jews that are not performing the mitzvah of Brit Milah. That we don't hear. In the time of Eliyahu, it came to a point where there were Jews, most Jews, or be it the number that were not performing the mitzvah of Milah because of assimilation, the danger of assimilation. And so Eliyahu fought to bring Milah back. Eliyahu worked as hard as he possibly can as an individual to make sure that Milah was reintroduced to the Jewish people and that people were once again circumcising their children, their boys. And because of that, he merited to be Malach HaBerit. And according to the Zohar, the Eliyahu Hanavi appears by every single Brit Milah. So anytime that there's a Brit Milah, Eliyahu is there. And that's why once the circumcision is immediately performed, immediately there's the actual cutting, right away one is told, pray right there, ask for whatever it is that you want in your life, because Eliyahu Hanavi is there and hopefully he'll take your prayers with him up to the Shamayim. Now, there's a few questions. How long does he stay for? And the answer seemingly is that he's there just for the actual time that the circumcision is done, and then he moves on to the next one. And then another question is, how does he get from one place to another? If you have one Brit Milah in the United States, and then you have another one in China, or in Brazil, or in Israel, how does that work out? And the answer to that is that angels, again, this is all Kabbalistic terms and things that we could learn on a mystical, spiritual level, but angels get around, okay? They travel from place to place with flaps of their wings. And the average angel will have multiple flaps to get from one place to another. And it depends on their level of, I don't know if the word is importance, but their level of importance as angels. And Eliyahu Hanavi is able to get from point A to point B with one flap of his wings. So that being said, you can understand that if he's in Great Neck by a Brit Milah, and then in Great Neck Synagogue, just a shout out, because a lot of Brit Milah are done there, and then there's a quick flap of the wings, he's now in Eretz Yisrael, in Har Nof, by Yehavedat, shout out to one of my favorite places in this world, the Shul of Chacham Ovadia Yosef, now the Shul of Chacham David Yosef, and now he's there in one flap of the wings. Okay, so that being said, Eliyahu has a special connection to Brit Milah, and therefore we introduced this concept of Zek Hiseh Shel Eliyahu Hanavi Zachur Latov, who is remembered for the good. What is the good that he's remembered for? For the fact that he reintroduced Milah and some other things, but that he reintroduced Milah, and therefore he is one of the main characters, or very, very, very important character in Judaism, especially when it comes to the mitzvah of Milah. Okay, so you got Mohel, Sandak, Baby, and Eliyahu. We introduced Eliyahu now. All right, does one perform a Milah on Shabbat and Chagim? The answer is only if it's on the 8th day. Okay, so if a child is born on 8 days prior to Shabbat, then they will have a Brit Milah on Shabbat. The next Shabbat will be their Brit Milah. However, if a child, for whatever the reason is, cannot have the Brit Milah on the 8th day, and then on Friday afternoon, the doctor says that the baby is cleared for Brit Milah tomorrow morning, which is Shabbat morning, we would not perform the Milah because it's not the 8th day. And therefore, we would push it off until Sunday. If they can't make it before Shabbat, then they would push it off until Sunday, or Monday or Tuesday, whatever it is, better Sunday than Monday, of course, earlier the better. But ultimately, we would only perform the mitzvah of Milah if it falls out on the 8th day. And by the way, that's for Chagim as well. So Yom Kippur, if there's a Milah on Yom Kippur, we'll perform the Milah on Yom Kippur if it's on the 8th day, if it's on its time. Okay, awesome. How many orla do we have? The answer is 3. There's the heart, the ear, and the male organ. I spoke about that. The reproductive organ was chosen because it is the differentiator between us and the nations, right? Because of the fact that we're having children and then we're creating a line, and that line is being separated from womb for Jew and non-Jew, right? Different mothers, of course, but when you have all Jews is one line and all non-Jews is another line, and Christians and Muslims and so on. So that the differentiator is happening by the productive system. And finally, for today, why wasn't the child born circumcised? Like I mentioned earlier in the previous slide, because Hashem wanted us to complete ourselves. He wanted us to do something to complete ourselves. We will talk about moving forward, but Hashem on the next recording, we'll talk about what happens if someone is born circumcised, which could happen as well. And by the way, I guess what's that word? Trivia question for you is, and anybody who emails me with the answer will get a free cup of water when I see you in school that you're going to buy from the vending machine for yourselves. And I'll get the cup from the kitchen for you. But the truth is, you'll get some schar in Shamayim for thinking about it. Who was born circumcised in history? That's the question. Who was born circumcised in history? Email me, surprise gift, surprise gift. It might be more points on your grade. It might not. It might be taking away points from your grade. You don't know, but it's a surprise gift. All right, ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening. Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to continue Be'ezrat Hashem with our next recording coming up.